Immigrants coming into the United States are under pressure to acculturate, just like you guys were under pressure to acculturate. If you sit beside Kevin, he's gonna punch you. So you need to hit him first. There are two theories that purport that immigrants will have less stress. We talked about the melting pot and multiculturalism last time. Women suffer more chronic and minor daily stressors. Women also feel less control of the sources of their stress. Now, and I was thinking about this last night. Why in the world are women under more stress than men? What is it about? Why does society tell us that men are in charge and women aren't? Who tells us that? Who's the one that came up with that idea?
The dominant culture?
What aspect of the dominant culture says that men are in charge? We've got more male politicians than female politicians. Why is that? Who says that men are supposed to be in charge? There are some individuals on this reservation. Last time you guys had an election, I heard men saying women cannot lead men. That's just not right for women to lead men. So you can't ever have a male or have a female tribal chairman. Sorry. I didn't come up with it. It's not my idea. They said that women can't wear a bow guard, which is the symbol of leadership. Why is that? Who came up with that idea? Where do we see this idea that men are in charge and women are subordinate? And we see it in the Muslim world, of course. Women are third-class citizens. But where else do we see it?
Just everywhere it is.
So who came up with the idea? Why are men just naturally better than women? Is that what's going on?
No.
It's just
No.
their religion.
Religion, yeah, exactly. It comes from the Christian religion. But it's not just the Christian religion. It's also the Muslim religion. It's also the Hindu religion. It's also the Buddhist religion. So religions were created by men, and then those religions are told women that they had to be subordinate. So the more religious people are, the more they tend to allow men to abuse them physically and in all other ways. So of course women would feel more stress. And we're going to talk about studies that they've done, that they've looked at, and what they've discovered is that women do a lot more housework than men do. Not in my house, but in other people's houses they do. I wash my own damn clothes. I cook my own damn food. I better, because there's nobody at my house but me, so I gotta do it. The older a woman is, the greater her life stresses because of the attitudes of their male cohorts. Now the strange thing is, of course, we may be heading into an era, the Me Too movement, where men aren't able to manipulate women like they did in the past. However, my dad was born in 1918, my mother was born in 1915. They were both fairly progressive individuals, but all of our friends, all of the people that we came in contact with, they had the idea that men were in charge and women were the ones that did housework. Some men won't do housework because they say it's women's work. You've heard that before. Somebody has said that to you before. I hope it's not your significant other.
No.
Oh, good.
I
Otherwise,
just heard it before.
otherwise he'd lose most of his upper teeth. Just a thought. Just a thought. Anyway. So as time goes by, things are changing. Men are doing a lot more work in the house, and they don't think of select things as women's work or men's work. Once upon a time, only men were doctors, not women. And of course, it took women breaking that ceiling in order for women to become doctors. Lawyers, the same way. Soldiers, women couldn't die in combat until, who was it? Barack Obama's the one that signed the law. Before that, it was against the law for women to be in combat. We didn't send women into combat. That's why if you look at the Vietnam Wall, there's 57,000 names on there. Almost all of them are men. Like 99.7% are all men.
Would that kind of relate to, I guess, children? Like maybe boys playing with girls' toys or girls playing with boys' toys?
Yeah, kinda, sure. We have an idea that only boys play with cars and girls play with dolls. Boys play with guns, girls play with, I don't know. There must be something that they play with, other than dolls.
Bingo.
They play house. Okay. Boys play kill and girls play relationships. Walter Cannon introduced the word stress to medicine in 1932. Cannon observed that when he stressed the body, extreme temperatures, oxygen deprivation, emotion-arousing stimuli, he had similar reactions from the body. The fight or flight reaction, outpouring of epinephrine, cortisol, and other hormones that prepare an organism to defend against the threat. And that's what happened when he stressed them out. These reactions were more adaptive for our ancestors, allowing them the greatest probability of survival. So the more epinephrine you put out, the more cortisol you put out, the more likely you were to survive. And if you didn't survive, then you dropped out of the gene pool. So we needed an extreme reaction, and that's one of the reasons why we overreact to stress today. However, these reactions may contribute to stress-related illnesses in modern times, and of course this is a problem. What are some of the stress-related illnesses? Cancer, heart attack, high blood pressure, all of these are stress-related, ulcers, there's just a ton of them. When danger is perceived by the sensory organs, a message is sent to the reticular formation. The RAS relays information in two directions. It routes the information of possible danger through the thalamus, which sorts the information and sends it to the hypothalamus, the limbic system, and on to higher order thinking regions in the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex interprets the danger and sends the information to the sympathetic nervous system that prepares the body for fight or flight. The sympathetic nervous system prepares the body for fight or flight by increasing the heart rate, by dilating the pupils, by secreting stress hormones, by slowing digestion, by increasing blood flow to the muscles, and dumping stored energy into the system. And the reason it does that is because it's trying to save energy so that you can fight or flee. And when we're talking about fleeing, you need to run as fast as you possibly can. Humans are not very fast. We're not. We only run about 35 miles an hour if we're Usain Bolt. If we're not Usain Bolt, we don't run quite that fast. We run 30 miles an hour or 25 miles an hour. Well, most predators, most cats, most packs of dogs run a lot faster than 25 or 35 miles an hour. So we need all the energy that we can get just in order to survive, because we're not going to be able to fight them off. I don't know if you have sharpened your teeth lately, but the probability of you being able to fight off a mountain lion is not very good. Okay. I don't know how your fingernails look, but I'm guessing that's not going to, well, that's not too bad. I don't think you're going to be able to outclaw a mountain lion or a pack of dogs. Stress triggers the hypothalamus to release corticotropin-releasing hormone, which stimulates a pituitary gland to release adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. ACTH triggers the adrenal glands to stimulate the adrenal medulla to release epinephrine and norepinephrine. This is the rapid response to stress. Epinephrine and norepinephrine gives us more energy, makes us feel like we can win a fight. That's what norepinephrine makes us feel like we can win. A system that is slower to kick in follows the same pattern, but instead stimulates the adrenal cortex to release corticosteroids, which reduces inflammation and promotes healing. Also released by the adrenal cortex is cortisol, which raises glucose levels and inhibits the body tissue from utilizing glucose except in the brain, where we need to be able to think in order to figure out how to get away. So we need our brains to be at optimum levels. If the stress isn't relieved, cortisol will peak about 30 minutes after the stress is first introduced. Too much cortisol for a prolonged period of time can cause hypertension, immunosuppression, and psychological problems from overstimulation. Now we're scared all the time. We have anxiety problems. We have panic attacks. And now we got a real serious problem. Once enough cortisol is produced to handle the stress, cortisol in the blood travels to the hippocampus, which is rich in cortisol receptors, where stimulation informs the hypothalamus to stop producing CRH. The hippocampus is really important because we have to remember how we got into this problem and how we got ourselves out. So we need to remember this stuff, and that's why it goes to the hippocampus. And at this stage, of course, we stop producing those kinds of hormones. Under prolonged stress, the hippocampus can become damaged, leaving it unable to signal the hypothalamus that enough cortisol has been released. This is known as hypercortisolism and has been linked to the high rate of cognitive decline in cases of Alzheimer's disease. So if you live through too much stress in your life, then you could have rapid onset Alzheimer's disease. You can become demented. It has been linked to poor neuron production in individuals suffering from anorexia nervosa. It has been linked to shyness in elementary school children because they're scared. And there you go. This is a case of hypercortisolism. As you can see, she has lost a lot of weight. Some people produce only low levels of cortisol, even under prolonged stress, and this is known as hypocortisolism. Hypocortisolism can lead to immune diseases such as fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, and asthma, as weird as that sounds. So if we have an individual that doesn't produce enough cortisol, they don't react properly to a stressful situation, the individual, their nerve endings can become hypersensitive. And they can produce, or they can, their joints become, will swell, and they will have rheumatoid arthritis, or their lungs will fill up with fluid relatively readily, and they will react negatively to select circumstances. Health psychologists use two basic means of measuring stress: self-report inventories, such as life events inventories and daily hassle scales, and physiological measures. One problem with self-report surveys is that remembered information is often inaccurate. The human brain tries to repair itself, it tries to protect itself. So if something negative happened to you, then the probability of your remembering it isn't really very good. If you're in a stressful situation, you're probably going to remember it in the most positive terms you possibly can, because it hurts too much to remember it in the correct way, the way it actually happened. So you'll try to correct it. You'll try to, instead of being a victim, you'll try to become the hero. So in your own mind, you'll think more positively about yourself. But that's good, because at least your brain is not going to hurt so much. At least your mind is not going to become overly stressed. If it does become overly stressed, potentially one of the things that could happen is that you could develop anxiety or panic attacks. And we certainly don't want that to happen.
I think like traditionalists, I guess they say that they have like ceremonies.
Sure.
And they say don't bring up the past.
Right.
But then again, like therapists and psychologists, they have to reflect back on what took place that created trauma.
Right.
In order to, I guess, get help.
Right.
Be healed, basically.
Yeah.
So which is right, the traditionalists or the psychologists?
I guess whichever one you believe in.
That's a good point. It's whichever one you believe in.
Like someone could be so traditional and go with the traditional side, and someone could be like more of the Western side and not know anything about the traditional side and go with the Western side.
Right, but what problem might we potentially have if we try to not think about the past?
It'll just
Can
build-
you really forget about the
It'll
past?
just build up.
No, but you go through ceremonies, you just paid $500 to do this damn ceremony. You go through ceremonies and the ceremony tells you you're healed. So he's telling you you're healed, and now you don't feel so bad about what happened to you because he says you're healed, and he knows what he's talking about. But as a Western psychologist, what I feel you need to do is deal with your problem. So we need to talk about it so that you become more comfortable with your problem. Remember I said the human brain tries to make you the hero instead of the victim? That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to show you that it's not as bad as you feel like it is. We need to deal with this problem. So we get the same results. No, we don't. His way, he just says that it didn't. He doesn't say it didn't happen. He just says it's not important enough to think about it anymore. So you don't think about it anymore. The one thing that we need to do is get you not to think about it. So Western psychology does it one way, and traditional healing does it another way. So the question is, as long as you're traditional, you're going to be okay. But what if you're not as traditional as you should be? You're still going to think about it. So he didn't really heal you because you're not traditional enough to be healed, to not think about it.
Okay.
Okay? Okay. So both ways of doing things are correct. Okay. They just handle things a little bit differently, and the outcome is, well, kind of the same, except traditional healing, you're healed better because he tells you it's not important that you think about it anymore. Don't think about the past. Can you do that, not think about the past? See, you're too Westernized. That's your problem. Okay, so, and we do. We try to correct things in our minds. I don't know if you've ever had a traumatic event that happened to you. The first time you thought about it, you went, oh my God, this is what happened. And then the next time you thought about it, you thought, well, it wasn't that bad. I've still got one arm. It's not that bad. And then the next time you think about it, you go, it didn't hurt that much. So your brain is trying to repair itself. It's trying to make this event less traumatic. That's not the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And the more you think about it, the more your brain repairs itself. If you're that kind of a person. Now see, I'm that kind of a person. So I go through all these traumatic events and they don't bother me anymore. Because I beat them with a stick so much that eventually I beat them to death. So now they don't bother me anymore. I do something stupid. Like wear these socks. I'm okay with it right now. I put them on this morning, I'm going, oh my God, everybody's gonna hate me at school. They're gonna make fun of me. They're gonna laugh. Everybody's gonna laugh. And then I thought to myself, well, that's why I'm wearing them, so people will laugh. There you go. See, I've repaired myself. Health psychologists have solved the self-reported inaccuracy issue by sampling people's behavior and experiences in real time in a process known as ecological momentary assessment. By using diary entries, signal contingent recordings on a smartphone or a notepad, yada, 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 yada. Anyway, they call you up and they say, well, how are you feeling right this second? And then you write it down. Physiological measures include changes in heart rate, blood pressure, your respiration rate, electrical conductance of the skin. Biochemical measures include cortisol levels, measuring your cortisol levels, measuring your epinephrine, and measuring your norepinephrine. Of course, those have to do with blood draws. 30 years ago, medical professionals closed their ears and sang, la, 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 la. Whenever someone suggested that mental problems could cause the individual to become sick. One such MD who suffered by suggesting body-mind integration was Harvard's Herbert Benson. Once upon a time, medical doctors did not want to admit that psychological problems could cause physical ailments. They didn't want to admit that. And for that reason, of course, doctors just want to throw pills at you, okay? They want to fix you with pills, fix you with pharmaceuticals. But sometimes the reason that you've got that damn cold is not because you come in contact with a cold virus, it's because you're depressed. So we can cure your cold by figuring out why you're so depressed. How about that?
So if you become depressed and you use substances, or maybe even like cigarettes, or
Sure.
that creates another problem.
Oh my God, you're really messing yourself up. Exactly. Yeah. I went into a psychology class one time, the guy said, nobody in this class, the colds aren't real. Colds are psychosomatic, is what he said. So I'm going to teach you how not to ever have a cold again. And he said, anytime your nose starts to run and you start to get a cough, you need to think about what's going on in your life. And if you can figure out why you're depressed, then you won't have a cold anymore. I haven't had a cold in ever. Not since I took that damn class. How about that? Colds aren't real. It's a reaction to a virus, and it's an overreaction. But why in the world are you having an overreaction? You're having an overreaction because you're not dealing with something. Okay. So all you have to do is figure out what that is that you're not dealing with. Deal with it, and then your cold goes away. So I haven't had a cold in forever. Not since I took the class. In the early 80s, Robert Ader was testing rats to see if he could create a taste aversion to make them stay away from sweet drinks. But instead, he found that the stress from the procedure was depleting their immune systems to the point that they died. He was killing all these rats, which I hate rats, so I didn't care. I'm kind of happy that they died. Though there were no toxins present, Ader's rats showed suppression of T cells. The decrease in T cells made the rats more susceptible to disease because of their depleted reserves. The rats died from stress. Ader's findings were replicated and studied by Nicholas Cohen. Stress killed the rats. They were dying because he was stressing them out. In 2003, Candace Pert demonstrated that the brain monitored the immune system with receptor cells in the hypothalamus. Pert was able to prove that T cells produced cytokines that had receptors in the brain that allowed the brain to monitor immune responses. If you know anything about, and we never even talked about T cells until AIDS, until the AIDS virus. The AIDS virus invades the T cells. Before that, we just thought the T cells were another white cell, but we didn't understand. We didn't understand exactly how the immune system was working. Now you notice all this stuff is taking place in the 80s. Pert did her work in 2003. Ader was working in the 80s. This is when AIDS first became known.
The 80s?
Was in the 80s, 1983, 1982, 1983. So because of the AIDS virus, we discovered all this stuff about stress. I know, it's really kind of interesting. We finally realized that T cells existed. And of course, that's what was being suppressed in the rats. And so because of the AIDS epidemic, we discovered another part of the immune system. And that's what Pert was finding, cytokines. Psychoneuroimmunology is a subfield of health psychology that emphasizes the interaction of psychological and neuroendocrine and immunological process in stress and illness. Now, this is really kind of interesting because this is what I worked on before I became a psychologist. I worked on immunology. The concept was coined in 1964, but until the Ader, Cohen, and Pert experiments, It could not be proven and was discarded as mere theory by medical doctors. Remember, doctors don't want to admit that your brain can cause you to be sick. If your brain can cause you to be sick, then they can't throw pills at you to cure you. It's not going to work. So doctors have denied this since the 1960s. But now we know it's true. We can fix people by fixing their heads, by changing the way that they think about things. Since the revelations of the rat studies, medical breakthroughs dealing with the immune system, stress in the disease process have increased rapidly because of T cells, because of the immune system. And what controls the T cells? The T cells are controlled by the way that you think or the way that you feel, as exciting as all that is. Now researchers know that short-term stressors can increase natural immunity in a process called upregulation, as long as it's short-term stress. However, with prolonged stimulation of stressors, the immune system can become suppressed in a process known as downregulation. So the more stress that you're under for a more prolonged period of time, the more likely that you'll get sick. Now I'm in a kind of a quandary right now. This is just between the four of us, I can't count, just between the four of us. Last week, we decided, that's okay. Last week, we decided that we needed to do something about Dr. Standing Courage's classes. They weren't, any of you guys have Standing Courage? You have 290 or 3? Yeah, you got 290.
290.
Yeah. We needed to do something about it. So what are we going to do? I mean, what could we possibly do? There's just the two of us, me, Jeremiah, and I. What are we going to do? So we decided that we needed to take over his classes for him. So this, yeah. But this is the 6th week. Starting today, it's the 6th week. Last week was the 5th week. So in the middle of the 5th week, we decided that we were going to change gears on his classes. So we took over his classes. But I've never taught 290 before, not here, not at my last institution, that was Ashford University. I taught research methods at Fort Belknap, but that was over 10 years ago. Yeah, it was exactly 10 years ago. So I didn't have any material on research methods, but I had to put all that together this weekend. Really stressful situation. So did Jeremiah. And I know. We were talking this morning, and it's like both of us are just freaked out completely. Somehow we got to put together. But the question is it a short-term stressor or a long-term stressor? If it's a long-term stressor, then potentially I'm going to get sick. And of course, I'm like 1,000 years old. And if I get sick, I mean, I could get really sick. And not only that, but if Jeremiah gets sick, he can just walk, through the trailer park and into the IHS, and he's all taken care of. But if I get sick, I have to drive all the way to Gallup to find somebody to throw pills at me. Okay, so we're kind of in a quandary right now. I think I'm okay, but I'm still a little freaked out. I mean, putting together a class that's supposed to be 15 weeks in a 10-week period, this is going to be a tough one. And I don't have any PowerPoints for that. And he told them not to buy any books. So they don't have books. So I've got to teach them all the things, I've got to teach you all the things that you need to know in 290 by PowerPoint. And I don't have any PowerPoints. And I looked at the PowerPoints from the textbook, and they are crap. They are garbage. They don't explain anything. So I got to put all that stuff together. It's 19 chapters in 10 weeks that I have to put together.
Like 2 chapters a week or something?
Yeah, 2 chapters a week. Yeah. So all I'm trying to do is give them the information. I'm not going to test them. I'm not going to. They have to write a research proposal. So I may get sick. If I do get sick, now you understand why. It's Kevin's fault.
Kevin's fault.
So,
funny.
So I used Kevin, I'm writing the test for, for the first part, and I used Kevin in the test. This is funny, because one of the questions, or one of the answers is, Sally is in love with Kevin. And every time Kevin walks past the house, Sally chases him to give him a kiss. That's one of the answers to the question. Okay. And in the next question I said, Kevin's in love with Sally. Every time he tries to get close to Sally, she chases him away.
No, I actually know a Sally.
Do you know Sally?
Yeah,
Are you in love with her?
No, she's like a really old lady. But she's like
Sally's in love with Kevin.
She's like a hot grandma.
Oh, God.
Maybe I shouldn't have put that in there.
Yeah.
That's too funny. Wait till you read it, it's funny. Immunosuppression has been seen after a divorce, and of course I've been divorced twice. Did I get sick? I lost a lot of weight. Immunosuppression has been seen after a death in the family. Immunosuppression has been observed in individuals who are unemployed. Immunosuppression has been seen in stressful bouts of exercise or military training. Immunosuppression is seen during final exam schedules, and this may be the reason that you guys come down with colds during finals week or just before finals week, when you realize, oh damn it, I've got 3 more postings to do, and I've got to write that damn paper, and now I've got to take the test. Immunosuppression causes a reduction in natural killer cells, T cells, and total lymphocytes. In one study looking at people that had high stress levels and those with low stress levels, 47% of the high stress participants contracted a rhinovirus when introduced, while only 27% of those with low stress contracted the virus. So as you can see, immunosuppression can cause people to get sick. This is people that they've actually sprayed the rhinovirus up their nose. This is a live virus to try to make them sick. And of course, as you can see, the more stress they were under, the more likely they were to get sick. Now, even if, who was here? Oh, Doris was sick a couple of weeks ago. And I said, some of you are going to get sick. Well, the reality is that, well, you're probably not under this much stress yet. You're only in the 5th week, or you were in the 4th week when I was talking about it. But even if that were to happen, there's 4 of you in the room, only 1 of you would get sick. So there you go. Both adults and children suffer more diseases when under stress. The flu is more likely. Herpes virus infections will come out. Chickenpox, mononucleosis, Epstein-Barr virus. Actually, mononucleosis is caused by the Epstein-Barr virus. Stress has been linked to autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis and coronary artery disease with accelerated progress. In other words, heart attacks. Studies looking at the healing process found that the more stress someone was under, the slower the individual would heal. Now, we know this is true of people with diabetes. Why do people with diabetes have a difficult time healing, especially sores on their extremities, like on their feet or on their hands? Why? What's going on with people who have diabetes?
Does it have to do something with their nerves?
No.
Blood flow?
I'm sorry?
Is it blood flow, like slow?
Yeah, it has to do with their circulation. Diabetes causes your blood vessels to become hardened, so they don't expand like they should. Whereas somebody who's a runner, you're both runners, okay. Yeah, you're both runners. Somebody who's a runner, of course, when you run, your blood vessels are expanding so that you can run, and your feet don't, get numb. But that's what happens with diabetes. It hardens the arteries, or hardens the blood vessels.
And it's good to keep your feet dry, right? Like, if you have diabetes, like.
Doesn't matter. Shouldn't matter. Wet feet, your feet sweat anyway, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, mine do too. I'm a white guy. White guys sweat like hell where everything. I got water dripping out of my ears. You know. In a study looking at people having hernia operations, those under higher levels of stress healed slower with more pain. Another thing that suppresses blood circulation is smoking. Smoking is a vasoconstrictor. So the more you smoke, the more nicotine you have in your system, the more likely you are to have poor circulation. And this is one of the reasons why if you look at smokers, their hands are purple or they're really pale because they have really bad circulation.
Would it be the same like a chew or something?
No,
How's that one?
no, just smoking.
Oh, okay.
Direct effect hypothesis is that immunosuppression is part of the body's natural response to stress. T cells and B cells both have receptor sites for corticosteroids, one of the stress hormones which when activated produces immunosuppression. But this is good. We need to immunosuppress an individual when we're in high stress situations because it takes too much energy for your immune system to be optimum. Lymphocytes have epinephrine and norepinephrine receptor sites, receptors suppressing the immune response. When children grow up in a contentious home, it lowers their cortisol awakening response. They are less likely to respond to danger with stress, which is linked to negative health consequences in adulthood, including earlier mortality. Okay, so if there's a lot of argument going on in your house, if you grew up in a contentious home, one of the things that happens to you is that you get used to it. You get used to all this arguing. And since you get used to all the arguing, you don't react to stress the way that you should react. And because of that, when you get older, you're already immunosuppressed. And you will die younger than you would have if you hadn't grown up in a contentious home. A lot of arguments are taking place. You're not reacting to them anymore. Why not? Because, well, you've learned that that type of a stress is not something that you react to. So later on in life, this gets really weird. So we've got a young lady that grew up in a house where there was a lot of argument taking place. If this young lady gets married to an individual and their significant other is abusive, she's not going to recognize it because as far as she's concerned, that's normal. And when he punches her, she's not going to be ready to be punched. And so she's not going to react to the stress properly. Isn't that ugly? Because it has become normal behavior as far as she's concerned. Somebody else, I've never hit my wife, certainly I've never hit my wife, but she told me, and I don't know why she said this to me, I guess to scare the shit out of me. She can kill people, okay? She knows how to kill people with her bare hands. She told me if I ever raised my hand to her, she was going to beat the holy hell out of me. And if I survived, then lucky me. And I'm going, okay, honey, just don't punch me. I'm always nice to her anyway. Indirect effect hypothesis contends that immunosuppression is an after effect of the stress response. Stress may encourage maladaptive behaviors that disrupt immune functioning, and it all depends on your coping technique. You may cope by smoking because it raises your dopamine level, makes you happier. You may drink alcohol because it raises your dopamine level, makes you happier. It suppresses the GABA, so you feel good when you're drinking. So that may be your coping technique, smoking cigarettes or drinking alcohol. You may use heroin, you may use crystal meth. All of this makes you feel better. And so this is the way you cope with stress. Fragmented sleep, so you start doing things like going out at night and staying up until 3 or 4 in the morning and then getting a couple hours sleep and then you go to work. Fragmented sleep, of course, can cause the same problems. Not enough exercise. It's easy to find excuses not to exercise. Really easy to find excuses not to go out and run or to lift weights. Really easy, I know. Poor nutrition, of course, is another problem. If you're going to run, you need to eat good food. Smoking weakens the normal production of macrophages at wound sites and also reduces blood flow through vasoconstriction, thus slowing the healing process. Smokers are also more likely to develop infections after surgery because nicotine and other toxins in cigarette smoke suppress both primary and secondary immune responses by reducing the activities of white blood cells. So, geez, smoking really messes you up. I almost said something else, but I didn't. I'm doing okay. Even though Scott was in my office today, dropping F-bombs all over the place. I know. He's so funny. Acute stressors last a half an hour or less and produce transient immune changes. Most immune cell parameters will return to pre-stress levels within an hour or so. Chronic stressors produce temporary changes in cellular immune response. Researchers looking at students anticipating upcoming exams noted a change in their immune response, especially if it's somebody that you are afraid of, like Christine. Okay, and you should be afraid of Christine because her tests are tough. She's tough. Even kindergarten students were seen to have elevated cortisol levels on the first day of school, of course, first day of school. You're away from your mommy. Allostatic load is the cumulative long-term effects of the body's physiological response to stress. Allostatic load can build up when stressors are unpredictable, when they're uncontrollable, or of long duration, or difficult to deal with. Allostatic load. Heavy allostatic load can affect an individual with decreased immunity, elevated epinephrine levels, increased abdominal fat, it makes your gut stick out, decreased hippocampal size, decreased hippocampal functioning, overproduction of interleukin-6 and other pro-inflammatory cytokines. So the inflammatory process is more acute. And your gut is bigger. Isn't that fun? I know. So you're fat, you can't remember as well as you did before, and you're, if you get an infection, the inflammatory process is more acute. Allostatic changes are similar to the aging process, leading some researchers to characterize high allostatic load as a form of accelerated aging and is seen in those of lower socioeconomic status, prisoners of war, immigrant workers, unemployed adults, and hurricane and earthquake survivors, people that are in a great deal of stress. They see accelerated aging process, as weird as that is. So there you go. Then you can drink alcohol or take drugs, and that'll accelerate their aging process even more. I've seen people die of old age in their 30s, mainly because they did all the wrong things and didn't do any of the right things. The immunosuppression model states that stress suppresses the immune system, leaving the individual vulnerable to opportunistic infection and disease. Glucocorticoid receptors resistance model states that chronic stress interferes with the body's ability to regulate the inflammatory response. This can cause runaway inflammation that promotes the acceleration of inflammatory diseases. And there's a lot of inflammatory diseases. Now we wonder why people come down. Why did Michael J. Fox come down with Parkinson's disease? Why does Linda Ronstadt have Parkinson's disease? Why is this inflammatory process happening to these select individuals? Why do they have Parkinson's disease? And the answer is because they did something stupid. Both of them did. One, and it was cocaine in both cases. Of course, Michael J. Fox developed Parkinson's in his early 30s, and Linda Ronstadt is in her middle 60s, I think. But I'm 70 and I don't have Parkinson's disease. Why don't I have Parkinson's disease? And why did they develop Parkinson's disease? And the answer is cocaine. I've never snorted cocaine, and they have a lot. So there you go. Parkinson's, cardiovascular disease. I have had a heart attack. Osteoporosis, which is where your bones become porous. so porous that you can't hold yourself up anymore. Arthritis, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, and periodontal disease. Those are all inflammatory processes. In transactional model, stress is triggered when stressors exceed the personal and social resources that the individual uses to cope. And some people have really bad coping mechanisms. If you watch an old movie about England, a lot of times those individuals didn't take care of their own children. They hired somebody to do it. I was watching a Jane Austen movie the other day, and this very wealthy woman wanted to know who was taking care of the children at home. And the young lady said, well, my mother does. And she says, you don't have a nanny? You know, like everybody's got a nanny. Don't they all have nannies? Don't you have a nanny? Aren't you going to have a nanny when you have your baby? Thus, the experience of stress depends on as much on how an event is appraised as it does on the event itself. And some people handle stress really very poorly. Something stressful happens, they can't handle it. They're driving down the street and something bad happens, so they have to stop and somebody else has to drive because they can't handle being in the driver's seat. And other individuals, they just don't worry about it. It happens, they keep going, they keep driving. And swearing the whole time. Why would they swear? Is swearing a good thing or is it a bad thing?
It's a coping mechanism.
Does it work? Does it make you feel better? Does it dissipate the stress? If you call somebody a son of a bitch, does that?
I guess it depends on the person and the situation.
Okay. I guess if you're really religious and you swear, then you feel guilty about swearing. But if you're not religious and you swear, it's just another word. But it's something that has impact. So it makes you feel better because you're dealing with your stress. Remember, my mother's favorite phrase was, a son of a bitch is a son of a bitch. and it was good for her to say that. I mean, it dissipated her stress. If she was pissed off at somebody, a son of a bitch was a son of a bitch.
Or if you're in pain.
Or if you're in pain, yeah. Yeah, it makes you think about the word and not about the pain. So now your pain's not as severe. Yeah, swear. Go ahead, do it. It's good. It's good for you. It dissipates the stress. But if you're religious, of course, it's not going to work because then you'll feel guilty. You think I'm kidding. This is all, they've done studies looking at swear words and whether they actually dissipate stress. And the answer is yes, it does. That's why soldiers are such horrible.
Oh my gosh. I need to print him out that list that's like alternative to swear words, like, shut the front door.
My dad was in World War II. He landed at D-Day and he marched all the way through Europe, ended up in Germany. So this was, 18 months later in constant combat all the way across Europe. And he came home and but his sister was an evangelist, so he couldn't use any words that he used when he was over in Europe. So instead of using the F word, he said phooey, and my dad said phooey a lot. He never swore. I never heard my dad say any bad words, but he substituted other words like phooey. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if I ever say phooey, you know what I'm really thinking. Primary appraisal is the initial determination of an event's meaning. Secondary appraisal occurs to evaluate if one has the ability to meet the demands of a challenging event. Cognitive reappraisal is the process by which events are constantly being reevaluated. And we're constantly evaluating whether we can handle a situation or not. It's just a constant mindset that we have. Sometimes we can handle it and sometimes we can't. Situations or events are not inherently stressful or unstressful, but must be interpreted by the individual. Cognitive appraisals are extremely susceptible to changes in mood, health, motivation, and very often change with the circumstances. The body's stress response is nearly the same, whether a situation is actually experienced or merely imagined. Thus, stress can be induced by remembering an incident or a possible incident. In other words, you could have gotten into that situation, but you didn't. But it's still equally as stressful as if you did get in that incident. So I'm talking to my wife on the telephone, and she's backing out of a parking place, and she runs into another car. She hits another car, and she's got my car and I've got her car, okay? So she wrecked my car. So I'm talking to her on the telephone while she's doing it, while she's wrecking my car. And she says, oh, I backed into another guy. Geez, he hit really hard, you know. And she's saying this with it, you know, she's not going, oh my God, I just backed into another. Well, she's a military person. She handles these things. And of course, I'm thinking, well, geez, I hope she's not hurt. That's what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking, damn it, she just screwed up my car. She just fooeyed my car all up. No, I'm thinking, geez, I hope Karen's okay. Hope everything's all right. So the guy gets out of his car and starts screaming at my wife. And of course, my wife, I told you, my wife can kill you in a lot of different ways with her bare hands.
The one now or your ex?
Oh my God. Yeah, of course now.
Oh.
You don't forget these things. So this guy's screaming at her like she's, you know, and the colonel just says, well, I've got my insurance and whatnot. And he says, no, we have to call the police, we have to call the police, we have to call the police. And so my wife said, okay, no big deal. So he's trying to get her all upset, and of course she didn't get upset. She didn't react the way he wanted her to. So he was all pissed off. And then the cops came and said, you didn't need to call me because this is an accident on private property. It's not even on public property, so. And my wife and she's talking to me through the whole thing as if we're having a conversation about the cat, you know. Oh, I just wrecked your car. I think I really messed it up. She did say mess it up.
This is your Miata?
No, this is my CX-5,
Oh.
Mazda CX-5. Looks like your car. Don't you guys have a SUV?
We have a Rogue, I think.
Yeah, it's an SUV. It's the same car, different company. Okay. Now, Diathesis-Stress Constitutional Predisposition Model purports that an individual's susceptibility to stress and illness is determined by two interacting factors. Predisposing factors in the person that establishes a person's vulnerability. Either you have a genetic vulnerability or you acquired behavioral or personality traits that make you react negatively. My wife is military, so when she was in a really stressful situation, she didn't react with stress because you got to get the job done, right? You can't just freak out and go running backwards. It's just not going to work. Same way in the emergency room. You can't react in a negative manner or somebody's going to die. So you don't react at all. You don't react emotionally.
So do individuals that, I guess were in the military during warfare and then also like during peacetime, like do they act differently? Because they say that keeping the peace is worse than war.
Yeah, the reason is because you know you can do what needs to be done in warfare, but in peace, you know, I'll react without reacting, and of course you get all pissed off like that guy did, and he wants her to react in the same manner that he did, but she didn't. So yeah, it's harder because you're dealing with people that are reacting negatively or overreacting to situations. Military people can't overreact. If they overreact, then somebody dies. So they train you not to overreact. They go through this scenario where this might potentially happen. and you have to react the same way, without emotion. You can't overreact. If you do overreact, they kick you out. You're no longer in the service, because you can't handle it. So there you go. Same way in the emergency room. If you overreact in the emergency room, somebody dies. So you can't overreact. And if you do overreact, they send you upstairs to the nursery. To work in the nursery, not, they don't put a diaper on you. They send you up to the nursery, because you can't handle the stress. You just can't handle it. So they get rid of you, one way or the other. Predisposing factors, precipitating factors from the environment, traumatic experiences that we're dealing with. Some individuals may be more reactive to environmental factors. And of course, this is the way it is in psychology. If what your client is going to try to do is get you to overreact. They want you to overreact so that nothing happens. They're looking for an overreaction from you. And so as a psychologist, if they start bawling like a flood, you can't cry. You have to just look at them so that they know how to react. They're overreacting to a situation that they shouldn't be overreacting to. And you need to train them not to overreact. So you can't react to them, especially if they're really upset. If you overreact, then you give them the right to overreact. And that's not what needs to happen. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a psychological disorder triggered by exposure to an extreme traumatic stressor. PTSD is associated with combat and catastrophic environmental events. PTSD was recognized as an independent disorder during the night. That's not true, not during the Vietnam War. It was in the 80s before they started recognizing PTSD as PTSD. The psychological symptoms include haunting memories and nightmares, mental distress and flashbacks. You can have PTSD from just about anything, whether you experienced it or not. All you had to do was think about it. I know people that some of the worst PTSD cases that I've seen were individuals that were in Saigon the entire time. They were drinking beer. They were never under attack. They were never shot at. They probably had lots of sex while they were over there, yet they still suffered from PTSD because all they needed to do was think about it. Physiological symptoms of PTSD include increased hormone levels over time of cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, testosterone, and thyroxine. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand, the testosterone. Testosterone makes you violent. It is something that makes you violent. So individuals coming back from Vietnam, one of the things that we noticed almost right away was that they did some really strange things. One of the things they did was have violent sex with their significant others, which sometimes was okay and sometimes people were complaining about it. That wasn't the biggest problem. The other problem was that if they got angry, they punched their fist through the wall, or they threw something through the window. And this had to do with violence. It had to do with their testosterone. The rest of these problems are not going to cause the same reaction. So sometimes they were injuring individuals. It was usually a significant other. It wasn't their kids. It wasn't the fact that they were dangerous to their kids. They were dangerous to their wives when they came back. And of course, the wife didn't understand. He didn't act this way before he went over to Vietnam. Now that he's come back, he's this violent person. And I don't know what's going to happen next. A lot of times they just got divorced.
What is the divorce rate for people who have been in the military?
Oh, it's really high.
Because, like, I know a lot of people that have gotten married before their significant other got into the service, and when they experienced stuff like that they came back and they just know how to
Their
deal with it.
personality had changed.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. And a lot of things were tied into tied up with violence, sex, for example. I've already given that as an example. But there are other things, they couldn't get in arguments with people without wanting to punch them. Like, that's the way they did it in the military. They were physical with the individual, and that's how they got through their day. And that, of course, that had to do with how they coped with whatever situation that they were in. They became violent. They used swear words. I've known situations where the lady was really religious and her husband came back from the war and he swore like they do, and she just couldn't handle it. She couldn't handle his language. It wasn't any of the other things that he had, but it was his language, as ugly as that is. Yes, very high. Vietnam, the average was like, they would divorce the wife they were married to before they left, and then they would find somebody else to, because the new person knew them as the person that they were after they came back. And they fell in love with that person. But the other person, the other spouse, fell in love with them before they went to war. And they knew them as the sweet and gentle, and they weren't gentle anymore. Weird things happened to them. My mom and dad were really lucky. My dad married my mom. They were together for a month, and then he went overseas. So they didn't really know each other all that well. Then when he came back, of course, he had interesting problems. His problem was upstairs windows, because in Europe there were a lot of snipers. So, as they're going through villages in France, the snipers would get in the belfries and they would get into the upstairs windows and they would snipe from people's attics. And so my dad had a problem with windows facing upstairs windows. He hated that. He couldn't handle it. Attempts at coping with PTSD include frequent occurrence of comorbidity of substance abuse problems, depression, and anxiety disorders. They're trying to self-medicate, so they're trying to find things that will make them feel better. And so they would drink themselves into oblivion, or they would start taking drugs. In Vietnam, it was mostly alcohol when they came back. The problem was that they couldn't sleep because they kept having these horrible recurring dreams, especially when they were in delta wave sleep. People who feel the lack of social support, women who experience harassment or sexual assault, and those with lower intelligence may be especially susceptible to PTSD. You can scratch this lower intelligence thing out. It mostly has to do with people that isolate themselves. They're more susceptible to PTSD. So what happened with people coming back from Vietnam? They felt like they couldn't be part of society. Society didn't appreciate them because, of course, the war in Vietnam was not popular. So when they came back and they were around the other individuals their age, they were called baby killers, and they weren't treated very well. Women didn't find them attractive because the hairstyle at that time was long, just like your hair, and they had hair like mine. They had short hair. And because they had short hair and all the cool people had long hair, they were rejected. And everybody knew who they were. All you had to do was have a haircut. And of course in the military, everybody had long hair at the time. This was the style. And beards, and of course they tried to do that, but it just didn't work. So they were rejected by society. Tend to be friend theory is a theory that females are more likely than males to respond to stressors with behaviors that are quiet, that nurture and care for their offspring. They establish and maintain social networks. This is, of course, befriending. And that's the end of the chapter. Okay. I guess I talked about Vietnam. Do you want to talk about anything else? We can talk about rape and whatnot. Women, like I said, or like the last slide said, women react to these things differently than men do. And of course, PTSD started as a male problem, and then we realized, my God, women who have suffered sexual assault or sexual molestation, they have a very similar problem to, it's PTSD. It's not combat related, but it's still PTSD. And so now we treat both of them in similar manners, whether it's combat-related PTSD or sexual assault. But women's coping techniques are different than men's are. Men are dumb, they're stupid. So they do things like get drunk or stay drunk or take drugs. And women, not so much. They seek more social support than men do. Men don't want to seem weak, so they don't seek the same social support that women do. So the soldiers coming back from Vietnam, the only friends my brother had when he suffered from PTSD really bad, and the only friends that he had were the guys from his unit. And of course it was a regular Army unit, so it wasn't like a National Guard unit where you had, everybody was right down the road. He had to go to Ohio to find anybody from his unit. And they would get drunk together, as weird as that is, because my brother didn't really drink. But he was supposed to go visit him, and the day before he went to visit his friend in Kent, Ohio, his friend committed suicide. That'll mess you up. Okay. Anyway, so men have a different way of coping. Women band together. The symbol for rape in Japan, the pictograph for rape is 3 lines. It's supposed to be 3 women. So if somebody is sexually molested, the idea is that women come together to help her. As weird as that is. Any questions? As much fun as that is. So women do a much better job of handling their PTSD, of handling traumatic experiences than men do. Because men have to be strong, they have to feel like they can handle it. And if they can handle it, then of course they feel like they're emasculated or something. They feel less masculine. Remember, the testosterone is increased with people with PTSD. And the reason it is because they're trying to cope with their trauma, with the trauma that they've been through, by increasing their testosterone level, as weird as that is. So if a man gets angry, what happens is testosterone level goes up and he becomes more violent. Why don't we stop right here and we'll pick this up next time.